Episode 1: The Whisper Inside the Confessional. I've been a priest for 17 years, and I've heard things in that wooden box no man should bear witness to. Affairs, murders, betrayals whispered through trembling lips, sealed with the words, "Forgive me, Father." But nothing prepared me for the boy who walked in the rainy Thursday night. He couldn't have been older than 12, pale as parchment, clothes soaked and sticking to his bones. But it wasn't the way he looked that frowned my breath. It was his eyes wide, glassy, and rolled completely white. And when he spoke, his voice came not from his throat, but from somewhere else entirely. He didn't begin with "Forgive me, Father." He didn't say anything in English. He whispered in Latin fluent, ancient Latin spoken in a guttural tone far too low for a child. And though I don't speak Latin fluently, every word landed like a cold nail in my spine. I understood in my bones. Ego sum porta tua nunquam aperire debut. I am the door that was never meant to open. At first, I thought it was a prank, some disturbed child parroting nonsense. But then he began confessing sins, mine. He named a girl I had kissed at seminary, in secret, a doubt I had once screamed at the crucifix while drunk on communion wine. He recited, word for word, a prayer I'd written in a locked diary buried in my drawer, and then he laughed. That laugh didn't belong to him. It echoed through the confessional like a second presence. The wooden frame trembled. The candle flickered violently behind the screen, casting shifting shadows like grasping fingers. I opened the screen between us. The boy was gone. I stumbled out, heart pounding, cold sweat down my neck. But what I saw next shook me even deeper. The church bell rang 3 times. Bah, 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 midnight. But the bell tower had no rope. It hadn't worked in 6 years. I ran to the altar, unsure what possessed me to look there. The floor beneath it was dampened with water. Episode 2: The Floor That Bled. I waited until morning. Light touched the stained glass windows before daring to move. The red of Christ's robe shimmered across the pews like fresh wounds, casting the church in a color that felt far too fitting after what I had witnessed the night before. The name, the voice, the blood, and the whisper that still echoed inside me like a curse. Confess what's beneath. But beneath what? I moved slowly toward the altar again. Eyes wary, heart still hammering. The stain on the marble floor had dried into a black crust, but the scent was still there. That sickly, iron taint of fresh blood. I knelt down, half hoping I had hallucinated it all. That's when I saw the crack. A fine, jagged line running from beneath the altar and splitting the stone floor in two, like something had tried to push its way up from below. My fingers trembled as I traced it, and the moment I touched the fissure, the church groaned. It was faint, like distant thunder or worse, like breath exhaled from deep underground. I stumbled back, knocking over the tall brass candlestick. It clanged to the floor, echoing like a scream. Dust rose. Silence followed. I shouldn't have stayed, but something compelled me. Not duty, not faith, something else. A pull from beneath my feet. Later that day, I asked the old groundskeeper, Mr. Corwin, about the altar's foundation. He had worked at the church for 40 years, swept every tile, lit every candle. If anyone knew what lay beneath, it would be him. When I asked about the crack, his face drained of color. There shouldn't be anything under there, he muttered. Solid stone, always has been, since before my time. I pressed further. Was it ever renovated? Repaired? He hesitated, eyes darting like trapped animals. There was talk, once, back in '89, a flood, or maybe a sinkhole. The archbishop sent a team to investigate, but they left without fixing a thing. Said it was best left undisturbed. Did they tell you why? No. He leaned closer, but one of the men, a mason, left behind a journal. He handed himself to days later. A chill passed over my skin like fingers made of smoke. That night, I returned alone. I had to know what was beneath. I brought a crowbar from the church shed and pried at the stone near the crack. It screamed as it lifted, not figuratively, literally. As the slab rose, a wail rushed up from the darkness below, long and guttural, like the voice of something that had never seen light. My hands frowsy, my chest seized. I dropped the slab, and it slammed back into place, silencing whatever had stirred. But I had seen enough. There was a void beneath the altar, a hollow space where there should be solid earth, and carved into the underside of the stone just visible. Before it slammed shut were words in Latin. Intra-Vritatm, PRDFIDM, enter truth, and you shall lose faith. I fell to my knees, not in prayer, in fear, because whatever had spoken through that boy, whatever had scratched my name into stone, whatever bled from the marble, it was not finished with me, and I fear, neither was God. Episode 3 The choir that sang at midnight. I didn't expect to sleep, but sometime past 3 in the morning, exhaustion claimed me in the church pew like a thief in the dark. What woke me wasn't light, it was sound, soft at first, faint, a hum, almost like a lullaby, drifting through thick stone and centuries of silence. I sat up slowly, heart already braced for the worst. Then it became unmistakable cinching, a choir, but not the sweet harmony of Sunday morning hymns. This was colder, lower, each note dragged like it had been buried and unearthed again. There were no instruments, only voices, down scenes of them, all rising and falling with an unnatural rhythm. I crept toward the source, the nave echoing under my footsteps. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the music pulled me forward like bait on a hook. The sound was coming from the walls, no beneath them. I pressed my ear against the cold stone. The voices were clearer now. They weren't just singing, they were chanting. And though I couldn't understand every word, certain phrases repeated like a curse. Ad confitendum per mortem, to confess through death. Corpus clamat in tenebris. The body cries out in the dark. Suddenly, the organ abandoned for over a decade rumbled to life. Its pipes wheezed out a discordant, shrieking chord that made my ears ring. I stumbled back. The lights above the altar flickered, then died, plunging the sanctuary into shadow. And then I saw them, flickers of white in the choir, loft robes, figures, singing, mouths open to wide, necks bent at impossible ankles, no eyes, just darkness where their faces should be. I whispered a prayer, my voice cracked in fear, deliver us from evil. A sudden gust swept through the church, and every candle blew out at once. The chant stopped. Total silence fell, thick and choking, but I could still hear something, not aloud. In my head, one single voice, whispering directly into my thoughts. You opened it. I ran. I didn't look back. Out the front doors, down the steps, into the rain, my collar soaked, my lungs burning. At the rectory, I locked every door, barricaded the windows. I sat in the kitchen with trembling hands, and pressed play on the church's security recorder, an old system that I had nearly forgotten about. The tape began at midnight, static, silence. Then, precisely at 12:03 a.m., the audio kicked in. It wasn't just chanting, it was backward chanting, played in, reverse ominous, frantic. I rewound it and slowed it down. This time, I heard words I recognized. English. He confesses what should be sealed. He invites what waits below. His faith will birth the breach. I paused the tape, a rising in my throat, but something else caught my eye, a figure in the video feed, standing motionless in the shadows of the altar, facing the camera. It was the boy. Same white eyes, same soaked clothes, except now, his mouth wasn't moving, but his chest was pulsing, in and out, in rhythm with the chant, like the song was breathing through him. And in his hand, barely visible, he held something long as sharp a piece of marble, the kind that lines the altar floor. The screen glitched. When it returned, he was gone, but the voices stayed in my ears long after I turned it off. I no longer fear what's beneath the church. I fear what's already inside it. Episode for the nun who never existed. I had begun to notice something strange about the silence in the church. It wasn't peaceful. It was watching me, even in daylight. I felt surrounded by something unseen, breathing just beneath the walls. It watched me from the pulpit, followed me in the pews, and most of all, it waited at the altar, like a dog at the door of its cage. But that morning, I wasn't alone. She came just after sunrise. I was in the vestry, attempting to pray, though it felt more like bargaining with something that refused to listen when I heard soft footsteps echo through the empty nave. Not the cautious steps of a visitor, but the confident glide of someone who belonged there. When I emerged, I saw her standing in the center aisle, a nun, tall, pale, hands clasped over her stomach, head bowed. Her habit was aged, almost antique in its stitching, with deep black folds and a white coif so spotless it shimmered. Are you here for confession? I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked up at me, and I frowned. See, there were tears on her face, but not fresh ones, dried, her cheeks streaked with salt, as if she'd been weeping for days. I buried him, she whispered. Her voice was brittle, like paper folding in the wind. I buried the child. I begged them not to make me, but they sealed the stones above him and told me to forget. My blood turned to ice. What child? I asked. Her gaze turned toward the altar, the one beneath. Before I could speak again, she walked toward the confessional and slipped inside without a sound. The door clicked shut behind her. I waited for her to speak, waited for her voice. Nothing. Hello. I knocked softly. Silence. I opened the door. The booth was empty. No rustle of cloth, no warmth, no trace she had ever been there. Even the cushion was undisturbed. I checked the front door of the church, still locked from the inside. The nun had vanished. My hands trembled as I went to the church archives, tucked away in a dusty back room. If she was real leaf she'd served, here would be in the records. The church had been operating since 1883. Every nun, every priest, every visitor of note was documented meticulously. I spent hours combing through baptism logs, service rosters, burial registries. Nothing, no mention of a nun matching her description, no record of any child buried beneath the church. But as I prepared to give up, one photograph slipped loose from the back of a yellowed folder. A grainy black and white portrait, an Easter ceremony, maybe 1920s. Rows of nuns standing shoulder to shoulder outside the chapel. I brought the image closer. There, second row, far right. Same sharp cheekbones, same empty eyes, but something was wrong. While all the other nuns were smiling, she stared straight into the camera. Her hands weren't clasped, they were clenched, and behind her feet, just barely visible in the dirt, was a tiny, half-covered wooden cross, the kind used to mark unblessed graves. Someone had circled her in red ink, and scrawled beneath that image were 3 words. Sister Agnes, silence her. I dropped the photo. The lights above me flickered, and somewhere, faintly from beneath the altar, I heard the soft hum of a woman's sobs. Episode 5, the letter hidden in the crucifix. They say the cross is a symbol of salvation, but I've come to believe some crosses were meant to warn, not save. That morning, I stood before the crucifix above the altar, the largest in the church, almost 6 feet tall, carved from old cedar, with Christ's figure so detailed you could see splinters in the crown of thorns. I had seen it every day for 17 years, prayed beneath it, bled beneath it, but I'd never looked at it with suspicion until now. The night before, I had a dream, or rather, a message. The nun Sister Agnes stood at the foot of my bed, her mouth stitched shut with rosary beads. She pointed toward the crucifix. Her hand trembled violently, and then she vanished in a burst of ash. I awoke with the taste of old wood and smoke in my mouth. So there I was, tools in hand, questioning everything I once revered. I felt like a heretic. I removed the cross from its iron hooks. It was heavier than I remembered. As if burdened by more than the weight of the wood, I placed it on the ground gently, reverently. My fingers traced its base. That's when I felt it, a subtle seam in the vertical beam, barely a crack, invisible unless you knew where to press. I pried it open. The back of the crucifix split with a faint snap. Inside was a rolled parchment, yellowed with time, sealed with red wax, imprinted with the mark of the Benedictine order. I broke the seal. The letter was handwritten in ink so faded it looked like smoke. To whomever dares uncover this, you stand in a house built atop a wound. The altar does not sanctify its seals. Beneath it lies what the founders tried to contain, not sanctify. An echo of the first rebellion, a voice older than the Bible itself. We called it Veritas in Versailles, inverted truth. It does not speak lies, but truth so terrible they shatter the soul. One priest confessed too deeply, and it answered, we buried what remained of him where the altar now stands. The child who followed him was not so lucky. Do not confess to it, do not listen, and above all do not open the door beneath the altar. Faith is not enough to save you from it. Only silence. Father Lucian Albrecht, 1891. I read the letter 3 times, each word sinking into my skin like freezing rain. The name Lucian Albrecht was carved into the cornerstone of the chapel. He was the church's founder, and he died mysteriously 3 years after its construction. They said it was illness, but now I wonder if it was something else entirely, something waiting underfoot. A knock startled me. It came from inside the confessional. Again, I approached slowly, hands shaking. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. Then, a whisper that didn't match any voice I knew. Not the boy, not Sister Agnes. This one was male, deep, like soil speaking. "You read the letter." The confessional door creaked open slowly. No one was there, but scratched into the inside wall of the booth fresh, raw were 3 words. Open Ike. Elias. Not Eliah. Elias. My birth name. A name I had buried long ago when I took my vows. Only one other soul knew it, and he was buried in this church 22 years ago. My brother. Episode 6. Baptized in Blackwater. I hadn't performed a baptism in over a year. Most of the families had left this parish long ago, trading stone chapels for streaming services and soft theology. But that morning, a woman appeared at the church door's appointment. No call, just a pale infant wrapped in blue cloth and a hollow look in her eyes. "We want him baptized today," she said, voice flat, "before sunset." I wanted to ask. She was alone. Something in her gaze told me not to press. Her name was Miriam. She offered no last name, no history, but when she handed me the child, I frowned. He was silent. No crying, no cooing, just wide, glassy eyes staring up, no life in them. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Only his lips twitched, ever so slightly, as if mouthing something. I led her to the baptismal font, though every part of me screamed to stop. The letter from the crucifix still burned in my pocket like a hidden sin, but I had worn the collar for too long. Some habits die slow. I lifted the silver bowl cover and recoiled. The holy water was black, still as oil, thick, as if mixed with ash and ink. The air around it hummed like a tuning fork. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light. It wasn't. "This water hasn't been blessed," I said. "It is corrupted." Miriam looked at me, calm as death. "It's been waiting." My throat tightened. She held out the child, whose lips now parted, and whispered, "Elias." Not a baby's babble, not mimicry. That was my name, spoken in a man's voice. Familiar. It was my brother's voice. I stumbled back. "What is this? Who are you?" Miriam took a step forward, placing the child directly above the font. The water rippled violently. "No, in blue. That child isn't the vessel," she said softly. "He's the invitation." Then the baby turned, his head, his neck cracked unnaturally, and his eyes locked onto mine. "Confess beneath, baptize above, or the breach will widen." My knees buckled. I clutched the altar rail for balance, heart pounding in my ears. "Stop," I whispered. "This is blasphemy. This is not of God." The black water began to bubble, and then it boiled. Steam rose, thick and choking. The silver bowl shook. A scream high, piercing escaped the font as if something beneath the water was being burned alive. Miriam smiled faintly. "It remembers you." I don't remember grabbing the child. I only remember fleeing, rushing through the side door, out into the rain, clutching the infant like a relic. When I looked down, he was smiling. His mouth slowly moved again, but this time, no voice came out, only blood. A thin stream of it ran from the corner of his lips, forming a single word across his chin. "Open." I dropped to my knees. The rain washed the blood away, but I knew it had never been meant for the mother. It had been meant for me. That night, I drained the baptismal font. The black sludge clung to the bowl like tar, resisting my touch. Whispering as I poured it into the earth, I scrubbed the stone with salt water, blessed it 3 times, recited Psalm 91 till my voice cracked. And yet, even now, I swear I hear the water boiling in the pipes, and the name Elias echoing from the drains. Episode 7. The altar that hummed when no one prayed. By now, I'd stopped praying aloud, not because I lost faith, but because I no longer knew who was listening. The church had become a hushed battlefield. Shadows pooled in corners where light should have gathered. Candles extinguished themselves mid-prayer, and the crucifix, the one that once calmed me, now seemed to watch. But it was the altar that changed first. It started with a vibration, barely noticeable at first, like the subtle tremor of a subway passing deep underground, except we were miles from any rail. Late one evening, I knelt to pray, more out of habit than hope. The moment my knees touched the marble before the altar, I felt it, a soft hum, like the distant note of a cello, low and slow, alive. I pressed my palm flat to the altar's edge. The stone throbbed beneath my hand. I recoiled. The humming stopped. At first, I thought it a trick of the mind, exhaustion, stress, some psychosomatic echo. But then it happened again, and again, only when no one prayed. Whenever I tried to pray aloud, the altar was still, silent, cold. But the moment I stood up, turned my back, or let silence fill the sanctuary, it returned. A vibration so deep it settled into my bones. And then came the breathing. Yes, breathing. One night, while checking the nave before locking up, I heard it. Hello. Rhythmic inhale, exhale, inhale. I frowned in the center aisle. The sound wasn't coming from the confessional, not the vestry. It was coming from the altar, like something enormous was sleeping beneath it, resting just inches below the marble slab, waiting, dreaming, or listening. I took a risk. I placed a recorder on the altar and left it overnight. Just one old tape, device and analog. Nothing digital, nothing that could glitch. The next morning, I hit play. Static. Man, a voice. Not mine, not human. It wasn't speaking words. It was speaking names. Softly, over and over, whispered in a voice like earth cracking open. I didn't recognize the first few, but then I heard Lucy and Albrecht, the founder, Sister Agnes, the ghost, and Ton, Elias. Not once, 17 times, each one slower than the last, drawn out, like savoring a memory. I destroyed the tape, but even now, I still hear the final voice burned into my memory. Elias, you are the last prayer we'll need. Later that day, I returned with a crowbar, salt, holy water, and a chisel. I didn't care about the consequences. I had to know what was beneath. I chipped away at the edge where the marble cracked days ago. Beneath it, a thin seam of iron-rusted shell lined the altar's foundation. I pressed my ear to the gap. No humming, no breathing, only a heartbeat, one I could feel pulsing against my skull. I staggered back, dizzy. The air around the altar thickened. Every candle in the sanctuary went out simultaneously, and then like thunder beneath my feet the altar exhaled. Not metaphorically, literally. A gust of air escaped the crack, cold as a tomb and carrying the scent of mildew, ash, and myrrh. It was anointed. Something had been buried, alive and blessed to keep it there. And now, it knew I was listening. Episode 8, The Exorcist Who Refused to Enter. I finally made the call I swore I never would. 3 rings, a pause, and a voice, dry as parchment and twice as brittle. Name, Father Eliah Granger. A longer pause, and a click. He was listening. I didn't ask for permission. I simply told him what I had witnessed. The boy, the blood, the altar, the heartbeat, and finally, the whispering voice beneath it all. He never interrupted. When I finished, the line went dead. The next day, he arrived, Father Darius Volkov, the Vatican's spiritual sledgehammer. He was rumored to have exorcised a demon from a bishop in Istanbul while blindfolded. Some said he once removed a principality from a monastery in silence, using nothing but holy oil and an iron crucifix. When he stepped into my church, the air tightened. He didn't speak at first, just stood at the threshold and sniffed the air. Then he turned to me. You waited too long. I led him toward the altar. He moved slowly, as if every step weighed more than the last. His eyes milky gray and cold never blinked. He passed the confessional, paused for a heartbeat, then kept moving. When we reached the chancel, he stopped abruptly. The marble beneath the altar began to hum. Low, steady, like a growl hiding beneath a hymn. Volkov didn't flinch. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small brass vial, uncorked it, and let a single drop of holy oil touch the ground. The oil sizzled, not smoke sizzled. Then came the whisper, not from below, from Volkov's lips. His mouth moved, But it wasn't his voice. "You do not belong here." He dropped the vial. It shattered. Volkov's body jerked back, as if yanked by invisible hands. His spine arched, and he fell to his knees. As rolled white, he began laughing, a cruel, guttural sound that did not belong to any man. I rushed toward him. "Father Eliah." He turned his head slowly, and in a voice that was neither his nor mine, he said, "This altar is not a gate. It is a womb, and Elias is the midwife." Tina screamed, a deep, soul-wrenching scream that shook the rafters. Every stained glass panel cracked at once. The organ behind us belched a dissonant chord, like it was choking. Then silence. Volkov collapsed. I pulled him away from the altar, dragging his heavy body down the nave. His cassock soaked in sweat. When we reached the vestibule, he came toga-spin like a drowning man. He clutched my collar. "You have no idea what you're sitting on. What is it?" I whispered. His eyes wide with pure terror searched mine. "I don't know." Then he stood and left. Didn't bless the building, didn't write a report, didn't even take his coat, just turned his back on the house of God and said one final thing before disappearing into the fog. "Seal the doors, burn the robes, and never speak your true name again." I never saw him again, but that night, something changed. The altar didn't hum. It throbbed, as if it were excited, as if it had heard everything, and deep beneath the stone, something laughed. Episode 9, The Door Without a Lock. I broke the floor open on the third night after Volkov fled. Not out of courage, out of inevitability. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I could barely pray. Every thought began and ended with the altar, as if something had sunk a hook into the base of my spine and was reeling me slowly, inch by inch, toward its center. I waited until midnight, the hour when the altar hummed loudest. The marble came loose easier than I expected. The crowbar split it like bones softened by rot. Underneath, dirt and ash packed tight, but deeper still, I found something buried. Iron rings, 3 of them, bound into a perfect triangle. I heaved. The slab groaned. Beneath it was a stone hatch, circular, carved with symbols I didn't recognize except one. 3 inverted crosses, etched in deep, bleeding rust. There was no keyhole, no hinge, no handle, just the faint outline of a door, and beneath it, a silence so dense it felt alive. I touched the stone. It was warm, and then I heard it, not aloud. In me, a whisper crawled into the base of my skull like a serpent made of syllables. "You have always been coming here." I staggered back. My breath clouded, even though the air wasn't cold. My hands trembled. Beneath the silence, there was a pulsy vibration I recognized now not as noise, but as rhythm. It was speaking in heartbeats, and each beat sounded like a syllable of my name. Elias, Elias, Elias. Then the altar lights flickered. The ground vibrated. My ears filled with pressure, and the stone hatch began to move. I hadn't touched it, but it was sliding, slowly, inch by inch, as if pushed from the other side. I panicked, grabbed my crucifix, spoke the rite of protection through gritted teeth. The hatch frenzy mid-motion. Silence returned, but only for a moment, because then he heard something from inside. A voice, not echoing, not distant, right up against the stone. "Do you remember your brother's last confession?" The air snapped. My stomach turned to ice, because no one knew about that, not even God. I had thought it was a cold spring night. Years ago, my brother had come to me, pale, trembling, reeking of incense and fear. He confessed something horrible, something I'd never dared repeat, not even in prayer, and he ended with words I still hear in my nightmares. "If they find me, they'll put me under the altar." I thought it was delusion. Now I wasn't so sure. The voice spoke again. "He brought us a piece of you. Now return the favor." A gust of wind burst up from the crack, fell and sweet, like burning roses and rotting teeth. The candles behind me exploded. The stained glass window of Christ above the altar fractured down the middle. And then, silence again. But the door remained, unmoving, waiting, not locked, not open, just present. Like it had always been there, like it always would be. And as I stood there, one final truth sank into my gut like a nail hammered by fate. That door wasn't waiting to be opened. It was waiting for permission. Episode 10, The Confession That Never Ends. The first time I heard my mother's voice in the confessional, she had already been dead for 23 years. It was just past 1 a.m. when the church lights blinked themselves awake, one by one, without my touching a single switch. I rose from my bed in the rectory, heart already pounding before I'd even stepped into the hall. The church called me now, not like a place, but like a mouth, waiting to speak, waiting to be fed. I crossed the nave with slow, reverent steps. I was drawn toward the confessional booth, its door already ajar, though I had locked it hours ago. My hand reached for the knob on instinct, but before I could open it, a soft voice drifted from within. "Bless me, Father, for I am still sinning." I frowned. See, the voice was female, fragile, familiar in a way that pierced straight through my ribs. I stepped inside the opposite booth, heart hammering, throat dry. The screen between us glowed faintly, as if lit from behind by nothing at all. Then came the voice again. "Do you remember what you did to your brother, Elias?" No. This was a trick, a manipulation, something from beneath. But the voice, God help me, it was hers. My mother. I shook my head, choking on air. "You're not her." Silence. "Then, you locked him out. He cried for hours. He bled. You hid the razor so no one would find it. But I saw. I always saw." "No," I whispered. "I was just a child. And yet, you knew what would happen." I pressed my hands against my ears. The booth seemed to close in around me. With groaning, the smell of ash and lilies thickened my nostrils. The air grew heavier. "Stop," I gasped. "This isn't real." But the voice grew younger, smaller, and suddenly, it wasn't my mother anymore. It was him, my brother's voice, no older than 13. "You told me God would never love someone like me, so I went looking for something else." My eyes shone, tears blurred the wood grain in front of me. "I was afraid," I whispered. I didn't understand, but I did. "Elias." I understood what I heard beneath the altar. I understood the bargain. "You didn't. You ran, and now they're here for you." The confessional began to shake. A deep grinding sound echoed beneath you, as stone scraping against stone. The door was moving again. I burst from the booth. The entire church trembled. From beneath the altar came a single clap, like a hand slapping flesh, the kind of sound that shouldn't echo underground but did. And then came the voice. Not my mother, not my brother, not mine, something else. "The confession is not over. It has never been over." The stained glass window above the altar shattered inward. 1,000 slivers of light fell like razors. The organ bellowed without fingers. The pews groaned as if holding back screams. I dropped to my knees, and I confessed everything. The lie I told the bishop, the night I threw the prayer book into the fire, the moments of doubt, the hatred, the silence when my brother begged for love and I offered doctrine instead. I confessed until my voice broke, until my throat bled, until the only thing left was silence. And even then, the voice beneath whispered, "More." Episode 11, The Priest Who Forgot God's Voice. The first prayer I ever learned it was Our Father. I whispered it the day I was ordained. I screamed it the night my brother died. I clung to it when the whispers began in this church. But this morning, I cannot remember the second line. I stood before the altar, palms together, lips parted, silence, hallowed, hallowed, nothing. I tried again, still nothing, as if the words had been scrubbed from my tongue, or were stolen from somewhere deeper, somewhere permanent. At first, I thought it was exhaustion, trauma, a thought of grief, until I looked in the mirror. My eyes were the same shape, same color, but the way behind them, gone, something hollowed out. My reflection blinked out of rhythm with me. I stumbled back, heart thundering, cold sweat trickled down my spine. Then I heard the whisper, not from beneath the altar, but behind me. "Who are you praying to?" I turned. No one was there, but the crucifix above the altar had changed. Christ's head was no longer bowed in sorrow. It was tilted upward, grinning. The rest of the day unfolded in fragments. I found my rosary on the floor wrapped around my wrist like a noose. The church bell rang 13 times at noon. A painting of Saint Michael wept black tears. Worse still, the Bible I opened on my desk was blank. No verses, no ink, just empty pages. All but one. One page in the center of the book had a single sentence. "His voice will be replaced." I fell to my knees, clutching my chest. It wasn't just the prayers. I was forgetting God, His words, His presence, His weight. Every priest carries the weight sacred burden of belief. But I felt lighter now, too light, as if my soul were loosening from my body. That night, I dreamed of a cathedral without windows. Inside, every pew was filled with versions of myself, some young, some old, some broken, and at the pulpit stood my brother. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then, from beneath the altar, a massive hand reached out, pale, cracked, nails like broken glass. He grabbed the Bible and crushed it into ash. The church didn't burn, it inhaled, and when I woke, the words of the Our Father were still missing from my mind. I tried other prayers, Hail Mary, Psalm 23, the Creed, gone, but something else had taken their place, a phrase I'd never studied, never read, and yet it was burned into my memory as if I'd spoken it all my life. Domini inversus, nomen ignitus, vox fides, the inverted Lord, the unknown name, the ancient voice. It echoed in my head every time I tried to pray, like a replacement key forced into the wrong lock. Now, when I speak, I hear a faint echo half a second behind my voice, repeating the same words, but not always in English, not always human. This church has not simply taken my prayers. It has begun to rewrite me. I feel it in my handwriting more erratic, in my breath more shallow, in my shadow longer than it should be. The deeper I confess, the more I forget who I was before. I am no longer sure I serve God. I'm not even sure I remember what He sounds like. But the thing beneath the altar, it remembers everything, and is teaching me a new liturgy. Episode 12, the day the church cried. It began with a crucifix. At dawn, I found it weeping, not symbolically, not in some poetic, metaphorical sense. Real tears, thick, wet, slow. Blood trailed from the corners of Christ's carved eyes, down His wooden cheeks, soaking into His chest like old wine. I touched it, still warm, still wet. The sanctuary was silent, but the silence had shifted. It no longer watched me, it mourned. The church cried all day. By mid-morning, the statue of the Virgin in the courtyard bled from her palms. By noon, the baptismal font overflowed with dark water that smelled like decay and roses. Every window fogged from the inside, as though the building itself were breathing, and then the walls began to sweat. At first, I thought it was rain from the outside, but the air was dry, and when I touched the stone, it pulsed beneath my fingers. That church was alive, and it was suffering, but not from something new, from memory. That afternoon, I returned to the altar. The hatch beneath it had moved again, a full hand's width open now. From the gap, a slow hiss rose. Not like gas, not like wind, like whispers tangled together, thousands of them, all speaking over each other, calling to be heard. I knelt, because I didn't know what else to do, and the marble beneath cracked. A thin fracture ran across the floor like a lightning bolt, splitting the sanctuary in two. The light above flickered, then extinguished. Candles lit themselves in eerie unison. I looked up and saw the pews move, not shake, shift. One by one, the wooden benches turned slowly, creaking on ancient hinges, until every single one faced the altar directly, like a congregation summoned for a sermon no man should deliver. The building wanted witnesses. The confessional door slammed open. The organ groaned a low, dissonant note, like something dying in slow motion, and from behind the altar, wobbled, a thin line of red ran down the bricks, perfectly centered, like a tear from an unseen eye. I stepped closer. Something whispered from within the wall. We remember what you buried. My throat clenched, because I did too. I was 13, my brother 16. We played in the crypt beneath the church. It wasn't allowed, but the door had always been unlocked. One day, he found a small crawl space behind the ossuary wall, an ancient tunnel, lined in stone and soot. He went inside. I didn't follow. He was gone for almost 10 minutes. When he returned, he wouldn't speak, not for days. And then, he changed. He stopped praying, started murmuring in his sleep, wrote symbols into his bed sheets, drew eyes on the wall that stared even when you closed your own. He told me, weeks later, just once, just before the end, there's something older than forgiveness down there. I told no one, I thought he was sick, until I found him one morning, face down at the altar, wrists cut, lips sewn shut with rosary beads. No suicide note, just a single phrase carved into the marble beside his body. Seal it with blood. I never spoke of it again, until now, until today when the church remembered. As the sun set, the cries of the building grew louder. The walls moaned, the candles screamed, statues cracked and sobbed as if they, too, were repenting. And in the center of the altar, just above the hatch, the stone began to glow faintly. 3 words etched themselves into the floor, as if burned by invisible flame. IT is ready. Episode 13, The Chamber of Unconfessed Sins. There are no hinges on the hatch. It didn't open like a door. It peeled back. The stone slid soundlessly, like flesh parting under a surgeon's hand, revealing a circular hole that exhaled rot and something colder than air. I stood at its edge, a lantern in one hand, a crucifix in the other. Behind me, the pews creaked, the statues wept, and somewhere in the rafters, something laughed softly, like a child playing with matches. I took the first step down. The stone steps spiraled in a perfect circle, slick with condensation and smeared in a dark, tar-like residue that pulsed faintly beneath the lantern light. The air smelled like forgotten things, like mold, blood, and incense that had soured over centuries. Every step downward felt like shedding a memory. By the 10th step, I couldn't remember the name of the bishop who ordained me. By the 15th, I'd forgotten the sound of my mother's voice. By the 20th, I wasn't sure what year it was, but I remembered my sins. Every one of them. Each one greeted me like an old friend as I descended. The chamber at the bottom wasn't carved. It was grown. The walls pulsed, breathing slow and steady, covered in some kind of damp root system that twisted like veins through flesh. The ceiling was impossibly high-loosed in a canopy of shadows, and in the center stood the confessional. It was identical to the one upstairs. Same carved oak, same crimson curtain, but this one bled. A thin stream of black ichor seeped from beneath the door, pulling on the stone like a shadow with weight. Above it, carved into the wall in bone-pale lettering, "Here dwell the sins never spoken." I stepped closer, and the lantern dimmed. Inside the booth, I saw no priest, no penitent, only a mirror. It shouldn't have been able to reflect. There was no light left, but it did, perfectly. Except, my reflection didn't move. It stared at me, smiling faintly. Its lips began to move in it in sync with mine, but speaking something old, something I didn't recognize, until I did, because it was every confession I had ever heard, spoken back to me in 8 unseen voices. Layered, tormented, inescapable. I staggered back. The mirror cracked, and from the fracture, something crawled out. A hand, pale, thin, almost translucent. It wasn't trying to grab me. It was offering something. A book, bound in leather that writhed at the touch. No title, no pages, just names. Thousands of them, one per line, each glowing faintly, each flickering like a candle in the wind. I ran my finger down the list, and stopped. Elias Granger, brightest of all, still flickering. I turned the page. Only one other name, written in deeper ink, soaked in red, still dripping. Eliah Granger, me, both names, one past, one present, both doomed. The confessional door creaked open. I stepped back, holding the crucifix, but there was no voice this time, just a sound, the slow, endless scratching of quill on parchment, a confession still being written, still unfinished, still waiting. And I realized this chamber didn't judge, it didn't forgive, it simply collected. As I climbed the steps back to the altar, the walls whispered behind me, not in Latin, not in tongues, in my voice, saying the things I had never dared speak aloud. And at the top of the stairs, back in the lightless church, I understood this wasn't about damnation, it was about completion. Episode 14, The Gospel Written in Bone. I thought the chamber of unconfessed sins was the end. I was wrong. It was only the threshold, because beneath the chamber, deeper than shadow, older than Dr. New, was the archive. I don't remember finding the second stairwell. One moment, I was standing before the confessional, its mirror bleeding truths. The next, I was descending again, barefoot now, my shoes abandoned somewhere along the journey. The stone beneath my feet was warm, like living flesh. And then I entered the vault. The room was shaped like a cathedral, but inverted arches bent downward, columns twisted like bones through muscle. No candles, no torches, yet the space pulsed with a dim, red glow that had no source. In the center stood a lectern, and on it, a book, no larger than a hymnal, but heavier than anything I had ever lifted. Its cover was not leather, it was skin, human, sewn together with black thread that moved slightly, like it breathed. I opened it. Inside, the pages were made of bone, shaved thin, etched with letters too perfect to be written by hand. Every line carved so deep, the words bled memory, and the ink, still wet. I turned the first page. It called itself The Gospel of the Forsaken, and beneath that title, a single line, "This is the truth that never ascended." The opening verse was familiar, a twisted reflection of Genesis. In the beginning, God saw silence, and from it, he carved a voice that would not serve him. That voice became flesh, and the flesh built an altar beneath his own. I kept reading. Each chapter was a reversal of the Gospels, of the Psalms, of every word I had once held sacred, only inverted, not blasphemous but something worse. Close enough to feel holy, until you looked just a little deeper. Chapter after chapter named sins that hadn't been invented yet, desires so buried that even hell had no name for them. And as I read, I realized something terrifying. This gospel knew me. It adapted as I turned the pages. On one bone white leaf, I read about a boy who buried his brother's voice with silence. On another, a priest who lost his faith, not to temptation but to obedience. And on the third to last page, a single phrase carved so deep it split the bone in half. The altar does not bind the voice, it amplifies it. That's when I understood. The altar wasn't built to trap something. It was built to echo it. Every confession, every whispered sin, every prayer said in doubt, they fed it. And now, it was full. I slammed the book shut. It screamed, not aloud but inside me, 1,000 voices at once, calling at my skull, demanding to be heard. I dropped the gospel, but it didn't fall. It hovered for a moment, pages flapping like wings made of ribcage. Then it vanished, sucked into the lectern as if swallowed by the room itself. The red glow pulsed. The arches above me twisted tighter, and the walls whispered the final verse I had read. The voice is not a curse. It is a calling. I staggered back up the stairs. The altar was trembling, the hatch wide open. A wind poured from beneath it, heavy with blood and incense, and something sweetly rotten. The pews were all turned now, facing me, and from the base of the pulpit, a voice rose, not from the ground, from within me, and it said, "Write the final chapter, episode 15, the altar that sealed itself again. It ends here, not with fire, not with salvation, but with a choice. The altar is open now, the stone slab fully retracted, revealing the mouth beneath it, a void shaped like a wound. The air that rises from it is not just warm, it's alive. It wraps around my body like a cloak soaked in breath. Behind me, the church is no longer a building. It is a witness. The pews turned inward, the crucifix watching, the statues crying, and above it all, the pipe organ holds a single, never-ending, no flat, mournful, ancient. I step toward the opening. My body is numb. My thoughts unravel like threads soaked in oil. I can't tell what's mine anymore. My hands no longer tremble. My faith no longer resists. I have been emptied and filled with something older. The voice speaks again, from inside me, from beneath me, from above. All confessions must be sealed, and I understand. It's not just a door. It's a tomb, a mouth, an art built in reverse, and now it wants to close. With me inside, at the edge of the abyss, I see it, my brother, or what's left of him. He stands just beyond the lip of the pit, barefoot, wearing the robes he was buried in. His lips are still sewn shut, but his eyes, God, his eyes. He is not angry, he is not sad, he is simply waiting. Behind him, shadows twist, faces blur, voices whisper. Every sin ever swallowed by this place, every name carved into the bone gospel, every scream muffled by stained glass, they're all here. And they need one more, one final soul to finish the liturgy. Me, I kneel, and I do the only thing I have left. I confess, not in Latin, not in whispers. I speak aloud, fully, Finally, I turned my back on the truth. I chose silence when I should have screamed. I watched my brother drown in voices he couldn't understand, and I called it obedience. The church shudders, the light behind the stained glass flickers, the confessionals burst open, the statues bow, and the altar begins to close. But not yet, not until I say the last line. I press my hand against the lip of the stone and whisper, "Forgive me." The wind stops, a silence deeper than death falls, and the stone moves. It slides shut with a sound like bone grinding on bone. The hum dies. The air clears. The church returns to stillness. But I am no longer standing there. They found the altar sealed the next morning. No signs of disturbance. No blood. No broken glass. Only a single page resting atop the marble. A torn scrap of bone-white parchment, etched in ink darker than night. On it, just one phrase. The final confession has been received. No one ever saw Father Eliah Granger again. No one ever heard the altar hum again. And yet, sometimes, when the church is empty, and the candles burn too low, and the silence stretches too long, the confessional whispers, "More."